Now we're going to just discuss the idea of a simple 12-bar blues. That's going to be the basis of what we're going to do. There's all sorts of blues forms, but we'll just keep it very simple. 1-4-5 blues for everyone that's educated on the music thing. And if maybe that doesn't make sense to you, it's just a good feeling style. That's basically what it is. So when we come from a jazz context in a background, there's a lot of elements that are involved in our playing, which are fairly harmonic. It's kind of the basis of our jazz music. If you're coming from the Indian classical tradition, there is no harmonic accompaniment in the music. So the approach we're going to take is from more of a melodic level of things, rather than thinking of chord changes and resubstitutions and superimpositions and really fancy things like that. We're going to keep it just in a melodic level, because they're playing like that really only supports that kind of system. If you're curious, I'm just going to be in B flat today as our epicenter. So we have our just 1-4-5, our B flat, E flat, and F chord for those of us that understand the jargon. Now, the first thing you want to do to kind of get into the Indian style is their musical tradition is one of oral and vocal music. They have a lot of instruments like tabla, sarod, sitar, bansuri. But the way that I kind of got into it and transitioned the sound is I stopped playing the instrument as the instrument, and I started to transition the instrument towards a more lyrical vocab based. Now, what I'll talk about is I'll just demonstrate kind of like a traditional jazz blues guitar approach, like with this 12-bar. I got a low backing track I'm going to play on. People like Pat Martino, Joe Pass, Charlie Christian, all these kind of precursors to our modern playing, they all play the guitar with a very clean attack and very pure tone, but it's not very vocal-like. So let me just demonstrate that here for you real quick. This. Like that. That's very not vocal. You wouldn't normally speak like that, or you wouldn't sing like that. You wouldn't articulate any sort of language like that. So that's not how an Indian classical musician would approach it. It would be very lyrical based. So that's going to take the technique of your instrument. I'm a string player, so I have certain techniques. For instance, Daniel, I know, is a saxophone and a multi-reedus, so his techniques are going to be different from the approach. So the first thing you're going to want to do is take that vocal element into the music and eliminate that pure, clean articulation, pop, 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 of all the notes, because that's not very lyrical. It's not very vocal. Like, notice the way that we're just speaking or anyone speaks. There's slurring. There's elongation of vowel, compression of consonants. Words are flowing in and out. The rhythm is very elastic. That's the way that the Indian classical tradition is kind of based. Now, that's the first approach I'm going to do it. The techniques of the guitar, bends, slides, hammer-ons, pull-offs, for instance, horn players, any alteration of slurring notes, bending pitch, tonguing, not tonguing, all those kind of things. Those are the techniques you want to explore to get the sound of it. So that's our precursor. Now, the first like tangible example that I can give you is the idea of resolution. Now, resolution in the jazz sense is the tones are going into the right note or the correct note. For instance, a lot of this blues tradition has the minor third ascending to the major third. Very standard, right? This kind of minor third moving into major third because we're based on dominant seventh chords, right? Right? For example, songs like Blue Monk, that uses that exact idea. Star Eyes by Charlie Christian, or excuse me, Charlie Parker. Uses that idea. Freddie Freeloader has that. All those proper resolution, right? So now India is on the other side of the world, basically. So what happens is everything becomes flipped and distorted in their own unique way. And the Indian musician, a lot of the times what I studied was it was the complete opposite. It was that major third dropping down to the minor third in a way. But is that kind of a sound? So instead of doing that kind of more traditional, that kind of way, it would be more like this. With that kind of movement, the opposite, that major third falling to the minor third. Now you have to think again, we're not thinking in a harmonic context, so I'm not going to like play the changes. I'm more moving around in a melodic way that outlines the key of the song as the tonic or the tonal center. So even though we're going through a very simple 1-4-5 blues, I'm really like letting go of the idea of make it through the change, where in a way I play B flat to E flat. That's a very harmonic way to see all these different changes. I did like a fun little substitution, like this 3-6. That kind of 3-6-2-5 move is traditional. Now, instead of moving through the chords as the tonal center, just keeping the root of the key, which in this case is B flat, as the focal point. So as a way to shift and change the quality, major, minor, augmented, diminished, suspended, of that root note, B flat, or the core of our kind of foundation. And again, keep that kind of vocalization in mind, rather than that like strict, like robotic articulation. So kind of like in that way, I hope the volume is clear enough and everything is sounding good. So the way that the falling of the major third into the minor third, as opposed to the minor third falling into the major third of our dominant 7 chord, that's like the traditional like American jazz style. But what I found in my experiences is it's almost exact opposite in the kind of Indian classical way, that major third falling to minor third to have a very like dramatic effect, way more dissonant, way more intriguing and interesting. And we'll talk about the idea of the augmented second and how that is like a signature of vocabulary of Indian music and how that ties into it. So that's my kind of first approach, and like a kind of typical exercise that I would do to kind of get that down is I would just probably play through some kind of like arpeggio style, like simple arpeggio, where I'm just going up the triad and then landing on the phrase of the minor third. And I could study that with all the chords. So I get this very like that kind of really wow sound. But then if you add that, again, that vocal touch, the slurring of the words, the kind of tendency of the voice, and then very subtle inflections and things. And we'll talk about that technique and ornamentation in a minute. So that's a kind of core about how I would develop my ideas and get that cool Indian flavor, that spice in the dish. Now, that can be applied to all the chord tones. So we don't just like focus on the third. I really like the fifth. The fifth falling of the lowered augmented fourth right below that, or the sharp for the scale. Same thing with the 7. But the cool part about the 7 is it raises to the major instead of falling to the 6. So as I have my dominant 7 chord, I raise that flat 7 to a major 7. Now, some of you theory police are going to go, Don't be doing that, okay? Major 7 on a dominant 7 chord, that's not how it works. That's not what they told me in school. Well, throw that away, because you know what I mean? You're free to do whatever you want. And I like the idea of the tension building of the major 7, like almost resolving, but then not quite. That kind of teasing, that real milking of tension and that kind of churning of the stew, right? So if I kind of show you specific examples, we'll do the 5 to the sharp 4, because we just did the third. So we'll take the 5th of every chord, just fall the phrase down to the 4. Right? So that's our 5 example, right? Kind of cool. It has that very like, wow, exotic sound. Whereas the 3, I find is that more bluesy sound. It's that kind of soulful sound. So as I'm approaching all these ideas on my improv, my sense of theory is, yeah, I like numbers and I like the science of it and the logic and the ration, but I'm really huge on sensation. I really would encourage a lot of people to think of the theory not as a sense of ration or logic, but rather as exploration of the sensation of the feeling you get from the note. So I think the heaviness of like your mind and your cognition, which is kind of where we put theory, really doesn't do so much because it's really about the soul, the way it's going to make you feel. So if you can theorize feeling, it's way more effective than theorizing information. And the kind of sharp 4 does this kind of a thing to me, and the flat thing does this kind of a thing to me. Right now, check it out. The 7, the flat 7 to the major 7. This one's a little funky, but we'll see what we can do. And then maybe something more traditional. And some a little bit more outside. Right? That's the kind of idea. So that the tension of the 7 really adds that like mysterious flair to it. That like kind of challenge. Yeah, great. Thanks to the clapping. Appreciate it. It really adds to the kind of mystique and the flair of it. Very what I would consider like esoteric sound, very secretive sound, as compared. So I'm like trying to catalog all these ideas in my mind as like using images and metaphors and feeling rather than like numbers, let's say, or like logic. Because if you think about the Indian classical tradition, it's not it's an oral tradition. It's not written down. There is no universal theory like in jazz, 2-5-1, you play this, you do that, whole tone scale on top of this, always play your minor scale here. None of that is really existing in there. There is logic, of course. There is really intelligence behind the music, but I would not use my jazz kind of thinking in this kind of context, right? And at any point in time, if anyone has a question, like, please let me know. This can be kind of open discussion. If you want to ask a question or something, it's totally great. So that's the idea. The first idea is the reversal dissonance, or what I like to call lingering dissonance, landing on the notes or approaching tones that are basically the opposite of our system to get that kind of exotic sound. Now, the techniques of it, like technically how I would play it, the facilities on whatever instrument, maybe you're a violin player, maybe you're a cellist, maybe you're a flautist or pianist. The idea of the technique is ornamentation. So ornamentation is a huge thing in terms of getting the sound of this music really ingrained into your playing. By ornamentation, what does that mean? Well, it's basically dressing the note or shaping the note in a kind of fanciful, unexpected way, just like a Christmas tree, right? Pretty boring and plain until you put the ornamentation on. And the biggest part of the ornamentation of the classical Indian tradition is what is considered melismatic. And melisma is in terms when you have a singular a singular syllable going on, but multiple tones. So, for instance, if I go like this, right, that was melismatic. Now, I'm not a vocalist, and that's kind of a silly example, but that's what it is. It's basically like glissando, but not in a singular direction. It's a flowing of the same vocal shape or syllable going through multiple pitches, rather than cutting off and articulating every note, right? This would be melismatic. It's the same sound moving through different pitches, but without breaking of the rhythm or the articulation of the note. So that's what melisma is, right? Now, this Indian style versus its neighboring Arab tradition of the maqam music, right? Because I was able to meet a lot of people from places like Afghanistan, Pakistan, Dubai, Saudi Arabia, Iran, Iraq. While I was in India, there's a lot of people traveling. So I was able to kind of discuss what's the difference between like the Arab Maqam style music and like the Carnatic Indian. There's a lot of influencing, but basically it is this sliding of the pitch versus the kind of hard attack. So if you're a guitar player, hopefully you know a lot about Spanish music and flamenco and the Arab origin of the guitar and ultimately the lute and the oud, the history of the instrument, right? So if I'm doing that kind of Spanish style, that'd be more of a traditional kind of Arab, which is the maqam tradition of their music, or like that. So you get a lot of that. So, for instance, the oud, O-U-D, which is the kind of grandfather of our stringed instruments here. There's a very famous player called Hamza al-Din. He's a Nubian oud player. Hamza, Hamza al-Din, Al-Din. Nubian oud player. He'd be a great reference for people to check out to get that sound. So if I was doing that kind of Spanishy, Arab, guitar-y scene, that kind of a sound, right? Versus in the Indian way, the same. That would be much more like an Indian style of playing, right? And again, I'm not the best example, but I do as best as I can. That is melismatic. That's exactly how we're going to want to do. So to put it into the context of everything we just discussed, plus that melisma, that we've all heard that. Wow, that funky like that Indian thing. It's the melismatic origin of the music, with all the pre-existing things we talked about. Sorry. So that's what I mean. A lot of sliding, wow, really fun. I like to call it like slip and slide guitar. So it reminds me of like when you were like a kid and you have that the water, the slip and slide on the ground. It's like woo, you're like going like that. That's what it's kind of the sensation or how I'm like equating that in my mind. But all this slurring, like you're totally, you're like really intoxicated, you're really drunk, and you're just talking like this. This is melismatic. Right? And equating that to your sense of time and the elasticity of the time versus the hard rhythm or like pure articulation, pop, 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 according to the meter, that's the one way that the Indian is distinguished in their music, is that elasticity of time. Noticing like as I'm landing on the downbeat or strong weak beat, it's not like absolute. It's not like, yes, we've arrived. There's a little bit of cushioning and stretching of the time, which has to do with the phrasing as well. So rather than how we would play in this kind of jazz style, you know, we're playing with the metronome. We're always very precise. The rhythm is boom, 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 boom. Even with the swing. Right? That's very like robotic, and nobody really talks like this when they're speaking. But that's how the equation is when you're playing. Now, if my phrasing becomes more stretched and the way that I speak is more elongated and natural, that is the melisma of that kind of Indian style. So hopefully that makes sense. And the way that the choice is moving like that, the stretching of time, the elasticity. Now, the way that I'm doing the melisma is in a really simple way to kind of describe is the sliding into the note or the slurring or the bending or the raising, however you want to phrase it, by one note below or one note above. It's a very simple way. So, and if I'm thinking of the way I'd want to slide up to the third, instead of playing I want to my major third, basically what I would have is I would slide from, if I'm ascending, I would slide past the note 1 degree of the scale and return down to that note. For instance, if I'm going up 1 to 3, I would slide to the 4th degree as a grace note or kind of an ornamentation and falling into the 3rd. In that way. So instead of just right there, I would go. But that 4th degree would be an unaccented note. It would be very quick. So I would go. And I can continue that up the scale. Very simple exercise, right? But now, if I just played it like that, that doesn't sound so good. So now I want to do it unaccented. So I would do it kind of more quickly. That kind of a way, that would be the approach I would kind of take. Oh, cool. We got some questions. Let me look at this here really quick. Hey, Saranch. In terms of improvisational ideas, how different or similar is Indian classical Carnatic music from traditional jazz? Well, they are pretty similar because you're dealing with the improvisation in an ensemble, but they're different because, again, there's no harmonic context in the Carnatic style, right? There's none of that going on. So they're not thinking of maneuvering through the changes. It's very root-based. It's basically modal music. So in terms of traditional jazz, like jazz from, let's say, 1955 and previously, that's like traditional jazz. In the Indian way, there would really be not that much similarity. But in the modal jazz movement, in the modern jazz, right, you think of Birth of the Cool onwards, and like that kind of, Gil Evans, Miles, Wayne Shorter, a lot of that music, Herbie Hancock and all. That would be way more similar to Indian classical music because of the modality of it. Let's take a song like, for instance, So What, right? It's pretty much like little groove, little vamp, Dorian, whatever. That would be way more related to an Indian classical musician as opposed to, let's say, Thelonious Monk or Duke Ellington music, which is like traditional jazz, per se. So the modern sound would be more like that because their usages of the modes and modal sound. But the specifics of the vocabulary, I mean, everyone's using the same notes. They have more than we do in our system because of their microtonalism and various acute pitches. But it would be more similar to like modal music, I would say, if that answers the question. And then in that kind of melismatic way as well, the downward. So sliding down. So it's a little technique like I would practice probably just doing. So it sounds kind of funny out of context, but then when I put it into the context, does it change it? So it has to be a little bit more quick. That's more like a traditional. But then we'll take that idea. I like that as same thing. I would probably go. So that'd be like way different between the two, or even more like a pentatonic blues idea. That kind of idea. I'll translate it down. Very simple now in a Carnatic way. I would probably go and probably take that sharp board, milk it, and shift it, and kind of, So that'd be kind of the way I would transfer those from the traditional jazz vocab into more like an Indian Carnatic, to kind of, I hope, further answer the question as well. So those are the techniques that I would kind of employ Oh, cool. Trevor, it seems like it would really help to have an instrument that can easily slide between notes. Yes, that's extremely helpful. For instance, piano, any of you piano players, I'm super sorry, but you're not going to be able to do any of what I'm talking about today, unfortunately. Marimba, beautiful. That's great if you play marimba. Marimba, any percussive percussion instrument, membraphone instruments, xylophone, vibraphone, marimba, piano, right? Those are all of the same membraphone family instruments. They're not going to be able to do this particular idea because that melismatic sound isn't there. Now, the way that I would accomplish that is through the usage of keyboards, synthesizers, and electronic instruments. The pitch bend method would be kind of how I would get into that. But I don't know. I don't have any solution for that answer because I just simply don't play that instrument in this context. So it would be a little bit more difficult to kind of achieve that. I'm sure there's some players. Maybe I'll try to think of some as we're discussing. Slides, something like trills. Oh yeah, techniques like an instrument, Saransh. That's a cool question. It's mostly the sliding for me. The bending could be really cool, but I just like the sliding. I don't know what it is. I just like that. The other techniques that one could use could be like bending, subtle bending. Those kind of things are vocalization. Hammer-ons, pull-offs. So those kind of bending things and things of that you could do, but it's mostly in that the sliding, like where my strong suit is. So in terms of our techniques, that's where we're at. But maybe some of you are like, all right, dude, get to the good part. Like, tell me what to play. Like, what can I play? You know. So we'll get there. So in terms of scales, some scales that I like, I have 4 scales that I wanted to kind of talk about today, which are probably not the scales that come to your mind when you're playing through a blues. Because what do you think? For those of us that understand, right, it's going to be this mixolydian. So our kind of, that's our mixolydian scale we're going to use for the blues. And then, you know, you can do like a nice little Dorian scale. Also, you could do your blues scale and any variation of your blues. Or any blues like that, but it's mixolydian based because it's dominant 7. So that's all fine and well, but that's not going to give you the flavor. That's not going to give you the spices of the dish that you're looking for particularly. You're going to end up with something like mashed potatoes and steak if the mixolydian, but we're in India right now, so we're looking for spices, baby. We're looking for flavors and all sorts of exotic tastes. So now the first one that's going to be like pretty inside, relatively speaking, is going to be your Phrygian dominant scale. That'd be the first scale that I would play, the Phrygian dominant. You take your mixolydian, which are going to be your 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and your flat 7. Lower the 2nd and lower the 6th. So now, that's my flat 2, my major 3rd, 4th, 5th, minor 6, flat 7, and my octave. So that's that kind of like snake charmer scale. A lot of times people think about that kind of very exotic sound. Now, what makes that, right? What gives it that flavor? Let's really like think about that and analyze it in our kind of mind. How do I get that sound? Right? What's going on in there? It's the degrees that are minor right above 2 very pivotal notes of the scale, your root and your 5th. Both the minor tones right have that kind of very passionate, soulful, almost exotic sound. But the real secret ingredient in this dish is your augmented 2nd in the scale, or your minor 3rd, if you want to think about that, between the flat 2 and the major 3. That's where the kind of Prince of Egypt sound kind of comes in. So it's the augmented 2nd inside of any mode that really creates that really interesting, exotic kind of Indian sound, that flavor, which is how I would get that tone rather than, right? The augmented 2nd. So if I put that into the context of this song, and I'll play kind of at a slow, easy pace, you'll hear what I'm talking about. It's kind of traditional. happy, smiley, smiley. Now check this out. So like that would be way more of an idea in terms of how the Phrygian dominant scale, which is our fifth mode of harmonic minor, adds that dark tension, that suffering sound, that kind of strife in the music. So if you want to go like happy, smiley, la la, having a good time, which is not what blues is. So keep that in mind. The spirit of the music is not like la la la, right? It's really about that dark tension, that heartbreak, right? So keep in mind, what is blues? Really, if you look at it, it's not like a la 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 kind of music, really. So that'd be the first scale that I would start to get the exotic sound, really working out your ideas between the root, the second, and the tension of that flat six. Something about sitting on that note is just so like, oh, right? And when you resolve down. So that'd be like my first scale I'd do. Now, likewise from that, the second scale I would start to incorporate, which is very similar to our Phrygian dominant, would be our harmonic minor scale. My root, second, flat 3, 4, 5, flat 6, flat 7. To get that exotic sound. And you could really play it almost on these scales. What I'm saying, I'm suggesting you play them on almost every single one of the chords or throughout the changes. Again, I'm thinking of the key center of B flat as my tonic consistently. So I'm not really trying to go through other changes through the scales. I'm really thinking B flat. It will be a diminished second, right? For Phrygian dominant. Diminished second, yeah, if that's what you mean by the scale, flat 2. So our harmonic minor, it's got that minor quality to it. So in terms of how I play on top of that, I can even play it from E flat. And then, now that one is a little gimmicky kind of sometimes, so maybe not like so much, you don't want like too much of any flavor in the dish, so you want to balance up the proportions like pretty well. So I would probably stick to Phrygian dominant as my primary choice, and then like a secondary choice, I would go for that harmonic minor. Now, the third scale, which you're probably like, oh, well, tell me something I don't know. The third scale, which is going to be one of our more interesting modes, is going to be our Dorian mode with the raised fourth. So if you're familiar with that mode, I have the root, second, third, and now my sharp 4 there. 6, flat 7, and my octave. So that has a really nice flavor and quality to it. My Dorian with the sharp 4. Now that scale would be pretty much applicable to any one of these chord changes. So I could probably play this at any point in time. So I'll just start off with more like a simple kind of mixolydian idea, and then I'll slowly evolve into using this Dorian scale with a raised fourth throughout all the changes. And harmonic minor. Then I can come back to the idea. And then something more inside, like a pentatonic. And from S, Dorian to the sharp 4 from F. Kind of weird, like, whoa, what? You can kind of combine and choose and maneuver through all of them, depending on what you want. And it would kind of take your time to like sit with each one of these scales. And I really like that idea of playing around with that sharp 4 and that 5. Again, like we talked about, like lingering dissonance, like letting it, like let it go and like let the note really expand as you play it, rather than trying to like put it in its proper place. In our jazz way, we're always thinking about, oh yeah, resolve that note, like push it into the proper tone, resolution point, like do the right thing. I would really kind of get away from that. There's really no right thing. You know, it's really your thing. That's what I've kind of come. And studying a music that's millennia old compared to jazz music, which is like a newborn infant compared to Indian, it's really like you do your thing in your own personal way. So all these ideas about resolution, the 2 goes down to the 1, the 7 goes up to the 1, blah, blah, blah. I don't really believe in that so much. You know, I really think that you can kind of do your own thing on top of it. In this Dorian scale, it's really beautiful. This one's great because it has 2 tritones in the scale, from the root and from the 3rd. So I always look for these little interesting points in the modes. So maybe that's one you don't know. Now, here's one you for sure probably don't know, I hope. If any of you know it, please let me know, because then we're on the same wavelength. This scale really doesn't have a name, or I don't know the name of this scale. I call this cluster scale. You can call it whatever you want. Now, it's really funky. You have the root and the flat 2. So far, so good. You can choose whichever 3rd you want. It really doesn't matter, flat 3 or major 3rd. So it's up to you. If you want that stepwise construction of the minor 3rd to get that Phrygian sound, cool. Or if you want that augmented 2nd to the major 3rd, like how we had in Phrygian dominant, you can choose. Or if you're really crazy, you can do both, which I really like that. Now, this is where we get to the fun part. You have the augmented 4th of the scale, and the perfect 5th, and the minor 6th. All of those together, which create your first cluster, sharp 4, 5, flat 6. I'm going to use the minor 3rd. Right, so if I just have like tonic kind of like vamping. Sorry. So that really exotic sound. Now, you get to the 7th degree, which is going to be major. The major 7 and the root and the flat 2 also create another cluster. So you have 2 neighboring semitones, sharp 4, 5, flat 6, and then you have major 7, root, or your octave, and then flat 2. So that's going to sound like this. Right, just up and down. But then when I slide to that major 7, yeah, whoa, baby, what's going on there? I love this scale. But it's like that, basically. So again, that's my theory. That's my sense of theory. When I want people to have that like, whoa reaction, that's when I'm going to pull this vocabulary. It's really beautiful, kind of super hyper, really gnarly exotic, like a doomsday kind of scale. So check it out. I'll kind of use that in relation to very simple mixolydian. Yeah, kind of traditional playing. Right, very easy inside blah blah. You're gonna fall asleep. So now here's the interesting part, right? Right, kind of really. And then you know, also some harmonic ideas inside of that, but I would refrain from that just for the melodic. Now, I'll use the same scale, but with the major 3rd and not the minor 3rd this time. then you get full tritones. Really kind of wow outside. If those of you that are familiar with more like experimental jazz, like say for instance Ornette Coleman, Don Cherry, Eric Dolphy, anything like of that school, Charles Mingus even, they would be like moving towards these kind of like, whoa, George Russell's music especially I really like. So that's a cluster scale. I don't really have a name for it. You can go ahead and name it yourself. I don't really care. You kind of feel free. I just call it cluster. So those would be like the 4 modes that I would use to really capture that sound. Any scale with like an augmented second in the scale would be really good. I want to do it very simple. There's a lot of other scales for some of the smarty pants here. Octatonic scales, various hexatonic scales, diminished scales, symmetrical scales like that. But that gets into a whole nother harmonic area, which I would like to limit myself to the melodic and keep it very simple. In that way, there's another question. The sharp 4 and 5 close possibility. It's crazy. It's crazy. Yep, you're right. Cluster gives us possibility player diminished chord. It's crazy. But I wouldn't think of diminished chords so much because I wouldn't think harmonically. I would really just think melodic, and I would just like limit myself and stick with that. So that's a lot of talking. I just want to play for a second, and I'll just go through all those ideas, and I'll just play for a few minutes, and I'll like show an example and maybe kind of say out loud what the idea is that I'm thinking in my mind. So just a few minutes of just kind of continue playing. Maybe like we can open up for some more discussion or more dialogue between other people or whatever. That'd be really great. So I'll just play here for a few minutes and say out loud like what I would be thinking and how to approach it. So typical guitar player. Right? Notice the attack and the articulation. That's kind of harmonic in a way. Now, a little bit of the touch, a little bit of flavor, mostly pretty dull. Kind of using it more as a subtlety. So the mix of the hit and now Phrygian dominant to get that kind of really interesting. From all of the roots of my chords, I'll think of. Now I'm the harmonic minor. Now my Dorian with the raised fourth. I'll start it like normal Dorian, like don't give out the fourth, like hide it, you know, make it kind of special. But still add those little flares. It's kind of bluesy. And then now you really give him that give them the punch. But slowly unravel it, you know? Then you resolve it, you know, do the jazzy thing, like let them down easy, you know, like that. So you're at a point where you're like, oh baby, I'm going. The adrenaline's running, like I'm ready to go into outer space. So now here's your cluster scale coming out of the Dorian with the raised fourth. So you'll be able to hear it pretty much right away. That kind of wow, that dizzying effect, that like dissonance in your mind, basically. Shit, sorry. And those, etc., is going on. A big thing in the Indian tradition is the transposition of phrases. Thank you. The transposition of a phrase across the span of multiple octaves is something in the jazz way we don't traditionally do. That little last one, which I did that. Which end on the beat of the E natural, which is like, that's the tritone, don't play that note, right? It's kind of the idea of how you would transpose certain phrases across multiple octaves, elongating your phrase towards an end goal with those sounds. Rather than in our jazz way, we would probably avoid playing phrases multiple times or the same notes multiple times because it's felt as like not quite as original. Now there is that kind of Dorian sound, this it's like a Dorian pentatonic where I'm using my 1, 2, minor third, perfect fifth, and sixth. It's like a Dorian pentatonic. Now, there's this great kind of way you can make this into that Carnatic style. So I'll go back and forth between like jazz articulation and more like Indian classical articulation. So we'll start with the kind of jazz. It's kind of like a Charlie Christian thing. It's very bluesy, but noticing I'm trying to alter the phrase. Every phrase should be like slightly different. Now in that kind of Indian way. Across multiple octaves. So fusing the two together. Right? And then you can do that's like jazzy. And then you kind of get kind of Indian. It sounds a little funny, but like. And instead of like. That's kind of more traditional. Right, so that's the way I would articulate it. And you gotta think again, blues music. If you really understand the origin of blues as a vocal music, spiritual music, work song music, it's all vocal based. Everything is the voice. You should sound like you're singing on the instrument, which all this kind of really like, you know, it really kind of sounds like that. So it's super interesting the way like I try to do it. growing up like playing music in church, which is rooted in the blues, and then expanding into jazz and then the Indian thing, it's kind of all coming full circle. They're super complementary. I believe there's not so much of a difference between the two, although the sound is different, right? It's all music at a certain point. So I would kind of try to take like those blues jazz ideas and convert them in an ornamentational way, or dress them up in a certain way to get that sound. So, right, that's kind of a bluesy lick, you know. But I converting that kind of same idea. Now it might not be on this T, you know, but it's still the idea, same. And that's how I would go about it. And that's my very simplified approach to playing modern fusion style Carnatic music with like your jazz and blues. Specifically in the blues context, there's all sorts of blues. There's like open jam blues, there's minor blues, there's more like rock blues, you know, the kind of shuffle. All these ideas, I think they can translate pretty straightforward into the context. How do you suggest someone starts listening to Carnatic music? Oh, that's a great question. Well, there are 3 examples that I had that I wanted to kind of mention in terms of like the modern players that are taking, like how I'm approaching it, my people that influence me, the modern players. Number 1, who is actually like a pure Carnatic player, but he became like a fusion player. His name is Prasanna. He's a guitar player. Maybe I'll just type that out in the chat if I can. He's from South India, I think specifically Tamil Nadu, I think he's Tamilian. There's another guy, his name is David Fukazinski, obviously not Indian. He's a guitar player as well, and he plays with a lot of like modern cats. He plays like fretless electric guitar. Let's see. David Fukazinski is a great guitar player in modern jazz, studied Carnatic music very intensely and rigorously. He's a Westerner, but he's really into the style. There's also people like Derek Trucks. That's a more common name in the music community. But he's kind of more on the blues, less on the Carnatic. And then the final player is an alto saxophone player. His name is Rudresh Mahantapa. He is South Indian, unreal modern fusion artist, but hardcore Carnatic, like out of this world. You would never even know. So those are 3 examples. Now, for pure Carnatic musicians, again, I'll have to type this in the chat, but he's a violin player. So those of you that are familiar with the Carnatic violin, the Indian violin, they like play it downwards like this. It's really amazing, incredible. His name is L. Subramanian. L. Subramanian. He's a Carnatic classical musician. He's played with a lot of famous people like Stanley Clarke and Lenny White and John McLaughlin, like a lot of jazz fusion players. But L. Subramanian is his name. Subramaniam. It's a crazy long name. He's a pure Carnatic musician that I would like. And then another one, his name is U. Srinivas. He's a mandolin player, or was a mandolin. He passed away. Mandolin virtuoso. It would blow your mind. You never heard mandolin like this. U. Srinivas is his name. Let me put that in the chat because, oh, there you go. Oh, thanks, Trevor. Yeah, exactly. Subramaniam, unreal player. And then U. Srinivas, if anyone is familiar with him, I'll put that in the chat because he's an unreal. He was one of the, yes, thank you, Saransh. Oh, great. Thanks, team. Doing really well today. U. Srinivas, mandolin player. You never heard anything like that. Please check it out. If you gain anything from today, just U. Srinivas. He's a master. Played with John McLaughlin, played with like Zakir Hussain, played with Bella Fleck, played with Ron Carter, a lot of famous musicians and stuff. So those are guys that I would recommend to check out.